welcome to the Perspectives on Pastoralism Film Festival organized by CELEP, the Coalition of European Lobbies for Eastern African Pastoralism. We're pleased to have you for the third session out of 4. And this one is focused on speaking truth to power, looking at pastoralists' advocacy. And so with us today as a speaker, we have Dr. Christina Eschi-Gabert, and she works as a researcher and lecturer at the Institute for Social and Cultural Anthropology at the George August University in Göttingen, Germany. And she's recently put out a new book as an editor of Lands of the Future, Anthropological Perspectives on Pastoralism, Land Deals, and Tropes of Modernity. So as you watch the films, keep in mind that she'll be ready to answer your questions, and you can put your questions in the chat for the session, and we'll make sure to go through them afterwards. Just a quick note, so the Coalition of European Lobbies for Eastern African Pastoralism is a coalition of different groups from both Europe and Africa, nonprofit organizations, research institutes, and also community organizations of pastoralists themselves who have come together to put out the word about the importance of pastoralism and how it functions as a food production system and the importance of it both culturally and economically and environmentally as well, and emphasizing the importance of mobility of pastoralists. So looking at what are the structures in place that hinder or promote the mobility of pastoralists. As you can see, there are many different issues such as land grabbing that are urgent and pressing in terms of who has control over these lands. And so this session really gets into that political thrust much more. Rather than just explaining what pastoralism is, it puts the voices of the pastoralists forward. And the different films, the first one is an animation which explains pastoralism. The second one is a pastoralist woman who's from a women's pastoralist group. She will be giving her perspective in a short film. And then we have a film that is a participatory video. So it was actually made by 6 Maasai from different clans who came together with facilitation from a group called Insight Share based in the UK. And they're talking about the issues of the land grabbing of their lands and how that has been an ongoing struggle for them. So you'll get to learn about that. And then in the final part, there is a film from the Oakland Institute by a filmmaker who is not named because of security reasons in Ethiopia, that also looks at the land grabbing issues related to the Gibe 3 dam. So without further ado, I'll let us go into the films so you can see them firsthand. And as I said, remember to put your questions in the Q&A so we can discuss them afterwards. Thank you.
On about 40% of land on Earth, rainfall is highly unpredictable. Where and when crops and pasture will be able to grow can change from one year to the next. Food production systems that depend on predictability struggle to control these natural environments, even with costly investments. This option was never truly sustainable, and with global climate change is meeting its limits. But depending on predictability is a choice. It does not need to be that way. Highly variable natural environments actually offer opportunities for food production when producers specialize in being in the right place at the right time. Pastoralists are such producers. They specialize in making sustainable use of highly variable environments to produce food. By managing their animals' grazing itineraries to match the changing opportunities in their landscape, they can keep their herds in a relatively stable condition. They track beneficial combinations of forage plants and highest concentrations of nutrients. This keeps their animals on the best possible diet that only a variable landscape can offer. When they have the freedom to move to the right place at the right time, pastoralists make sustainable use of the natural environment and produce organically for domestic markets and export. Conventional food production systems that choose to depend on predictability need to combat variability to control the natural environment. With climate change, the natural environment is becoming even more variable everywhere. This is now our common future. If we learn from pastoralists, environmental variability can become an asset. They are walking the path to sustainable food production systems in the face of climate change. By sustainably turning environmental variability into food, pastoralists are already in the future.
The problem that is facing the pastoralists or pastoralism is the thing in other people's mind, the policymakers, they think maybe it's a primitive life and everybody should change from that to a sedentary kind of settlement. But we know it is not true, and that is why we'll advocate for it to remain, because it is our livelihood. And then in terms of the use of land also, others will see that as not being a good use of land. They see it like it's a wasteland, it is not properly utilized. But for a pastoralist, to have a big land is a necessity, because they also keep a large herd of animals, and it has to be done on alternative. Maybe you graze this side this season, the other time. It is for their own survival mechanism. And because of this, we know that big land is not a wasteland. It is a land like any other land that is used by somebody who is practicing agriculture, somebody who is doing private investment. So for us, that community land is a way of our own survival. And it is not a wasteland. It is a land that is, in fact, properly used for that purpose.
Irora balungana kumok elekilikwele nkulukwani ang tendiaba mekure taata iltung'anak oiro etaa yiok kiomonu enoning'oki yiok ele kilikua lang. Noolong apa naponu kulo tung'anak aponu aitanyamal iyiok peeponu aang'orr noolong peeponu aidurrie iltung'anak tolorien. Neponu saa 4 entedekenya. Naa ore inoolong naa tarehe 4 mwezi wa 7. Ore ake peeponu ingarrin 4. Ore ake peeponu neng'orr Enkai amu itu eng'orr iltung'anak tidie neng'orr.
Ore taa ena kulukuoni naa eneloliondo. Nibung'a empaka Masai Mara, nibung'a empaka Eserinket, nibung'a Okoronkoro. Naa ore ena kulukuoni ong'uesi natii naa loonkakuyiaa apa ootorripo omainiepo. Ore yiok naa ikira ilaramatak naa enkulukuoni kinchuyie.
Ikineputua apake yiok etii loopapa etoiutuo ninche yiok naa kineputua sininche loopapa etii loomeny apa. Neeku ore naa ena kulukuoni naa enaang' apa natereutua yiok serkali te Serenket. Nikiponu aamany ena kulukuoni, neponu aipim irkijijini lang, neisajili. Neeku ore naa ena kulukuoni naa enaante kisheria, naa enaante bila, ninye etii irmaasilan pookin, ninye etii iwuejitin naapiki imanyat orkuak. Naa ninye etii iwuejitin apa nainosie irmuran irkulie. Enaa tenakata ena soit oshi natii embata ena ambi apa naetuo aapik. Ore taa nanu entoki nagira alimu tiatua orkuak lang lormaasai naa lasima ake pee kintashe torkuak. Amu meeta entoki nabo nikindim ataas. Amu ore nkishu pee kiata iyiok, mee dee kiata tenkaraki endaa ake. Ninye kitumie ntokitin pookin. Amu ore aiteru inoolong teneisho entomononi naa enkiteng eng'ori, neng'orokini osarge, neyiolouni aajo naa lasima pee kinyiang'u, ore ninye pee miata lasima pee ing'oru nkishu. Metaa entoki natii tenakata tiatua orkuak. Ore sii dii tiatua orkuak naa lasima paa ore tenakata pooki toki naba enaa enikiyieu naa lasima paa enkiteng itumia. Amu meeta sii duo katala nanu ajo kanyioo ena naji, naa teninepu nkajijik nikitii, kekwanikieki iyiok aa medol iltung'anak aajo nkajijik kitii. Nekitamoo sii ele kuak.
Meeta ninche gharama naata nkajijik ang kuna orkuak lang. Kanyioo taa nememut entim amu meeta intimi sapukin naadung'itoi enaa nkajijik ormeek, amu ore noormeek kemut intimi. Amu tenetii oltarakwoi nemut, tenetii nkulie akeyie mahitaji pookin duo anaa naashetisheki nena ajijik oolashumba naa kemut, kake meeta entoki namut ninche kuna ajijik ang ormaasai. Amu tinilo ikunyi dii entim niyau, ama iyiok intomonok naashetaki ate. Naa ore entomononi miidim atanapu entim naai duo atanapu naai nkeek sapukin. Miidim, nkutiti ronkeni elo asotusotu amu ntomonok naashetaki ate, mme lewa ooshetu enaa nkajijik ooswain.
Kuna ajijik kishet orkuak lang, ele kuak iyiok kitubulunye le kuna ajijik nikishet inji. Neeku mikigira iyiok aiharibu oonyoo elapa orkuak lang, nimikiata ormushumaa likintobirie. Kuna ajijik ang ake kintobirr, naa kintobirr ake nikimurt temodiei nikilutoo. Neeku nkajijik ang kuna, ninche kitubulunye, ninche etubulunyie lookakui. Ore tenakata enaa enaaji namura, ninye kimurr iyiok nikiponu aapik ele boroi loonkishu ang, nikimurr nikijing. Ore enewuei pookin naa ninye oshi ewuei nikimanya siiyiok irmaasai. Ore kuna ajijik naa nkajijik ormaasai. Naa ninche mitambua taata ninche serkali ayiolou ajo ore kuna ajijik naa nkajijik nikitesheta siiyiok toosargeta lang toonkufu.
Netii ntokitin uni nemeoroyu, enkulukuoni, ong'uesi, oltung'anak.
Naa ore ena ong'ata nidolitata naa ninye oshi ong'ata nikiramatishore aiteru apake oduo. Metii olo aitayu emparna tenkai tenkulukuoni edoiki pooki toki. Naa ninye ebulunye irkeek, naa ninye nanapita ntokitin pookin. Neeku ore duo tipat enkulukuoni ninye enkishui, ninye naibung'ita enkishui e pooki toki naishu. Neeku ore duo tipat ang iyiok tena kulukuoni nenyanyuk ake etiu ake enaa tenikiye, enaikash naai tenaa ikituata paa kelo siininye enkulukuoni amu mitoki naa entoki naitoki atii shumata enkulukuoni.
Neeku ekijito iyiok toonkufu pookin nimikipuo tenakop. Amenang.
Ore iyiok irmaasai le Loliondo naa ketaaruaki apa iyiok tenkulukuoni ang nikimanya amu kimanya apa Sirinket. Ore aiteru tina rishata pookin nikinterua aarare aing'uraa tenaa kishuku enkulukuoni ang.
Paa kanyioo duo oshi esidano nayakai ena kulukuoni pee ing'oritoto?
Aisidai ena kulukuoni amu ore ena kulukuoni naa ore pee king'orito ena kulukuoni kwanza enorkuak lang apake. Itu doi king'as iyiok aaku ekira iltung'anak ooetuo ena kulukuoni. Naa keeta sii ena kulukuoni dupoto teyiok amu ninye etii manyisho ang, ninye etii nkariak, ninye etii nchulei, ninye etii emanyisho ang kwa ujumla entoki naai irmaasai.
Peeponu 2009 neponu nejing'u neponu ajing'u ena pejoto onkang'itie. Neponunui apejoo nkang'itie amu katii, nepejori nena ang'itie nenyamalu olorere. Etanyamala oleng kake ninye nenyamalu orpayian lai oleng inoolong. Amu etejo naa alotu, etununukoki nkiku, etapejoki enkang, nejo ning'asia. Nejo inoolong enaikash aituru nanu aye paasuju nkishu amu mayieu neye nkishu atii nanu. Kayieu naa kaok oldip peyie paatumoki nkishu atusuju. Amu etapejoitie enkang ai, nepejoo nkishu ainei, nemuta nkishu tenkaraki nena ambunini naetuo. Naidurrie lomua atapala atapejorie, nalo enkae wuei, nalo aitoki anyamalu aya enkae kata inewueji aitoki aiteru ai maisha tenkaraki ninche laetuo apejoo. Ore tanakata ketii iltung'anak lemekure tanakata eeta enkiteng likiyiolo ajo loong'ania tenkaraki lelo tung'anak otaretua nkishu, nepejoo nkang'itie, nemuta nkishu ang. Neeku ore ninye tenkaraki ina, enyamali teyiok pii naa enyamali ninye toltau lai nanu. Aitanyamala nanu oleng.
Kake ore naa enakop nidolta tanakata nji kuna ang'an naisiasha anaa kuna ang'an naramatishoreki naa ninche apa eisharie irmang'ati. Ninche oshi etanang'a iltung'anak oidipa atanang', naa ninche egirai aoru yiok. Mekure kiata eseriani tenkaraki enakop naishayioki. Nikinchira pae etaa kila ewuei nikinchiraki. Etaa taata ore entoki natioyo naa pee emuta irmaasai amu mekure eeta ai oitoi nikindim anotie esarunoto neme enarake ang'.
Ore taa ene nikitii naa ore enewuei naa ewuei neok inchoo, neok ildiein, neok ilchang'it naa ninche ake sii eok irmaasai. Tentiaraki ore tanakata wueitin apa neebaiki iltung'anak onkishu enaa nkonyek onkariak, nebaiki siinche ake tanakata ng'uesin ene, newaita apa waikezaji. Neeku ore tatizo nai peetaa enewuei, ore enewuei, ore enaalo naa ninye naa osilanka otupukutuo nkaik oltung'anak. Neeku ninche tanakata emurrorokino pooki toki amu ninche eok lelo tung'anak entoki akeyie pookin nanya enakop tanakata amu ore tanakata nena wueitin apa naaba enaa sidan, ninche ewaita apa waikezaji opotu, mekure apa kibaiki nene. Neeku ore naa enaa enewuei, ena taatoki maisha duo tanakata nikitii, ena hali tanakata kitii tenkaji ang'.
Ore naa etii ina, nelotu naa enatoki ayau shida naleng amu eewuo airriki yiok pookin tukul tiatua enkulukuoni ang'. Amu eetuo aorr iyiok aitumia enopa toki najo ilashumpa divide and rule, neponu airriki yiok. Neeku keetae tanakata keetuo oshi ometaa kiata nchot are. Iltung'anak oing'orr enkulukuoni oltung'anak ogira aing'oru olosek piibung'are kulo tung'anak ooyieu neya enkulukuoni ang'.
Neeku naa egira inkampunini aiendelea aigawa yiok irmaasai le Korongoro tenkaraki piigil ake yiok osina. Matejo esikaisho nemeeta enkiting'oto. Neeku kaomonu ajo ore duo sininye serkali nchoo irrugoki yiok nkonyek. Mikiata entoki nikinyal, itu kinyal intimi, itu kinyal ing'uesi. Ina taata peenyorra watalii aatijing nkwapi ang'. Naa kejing'ita amu ketii dupoto oompukunot pookin. Naa ina kikira ilaramatak mpaka oduo taata.
Nena nai eyieu nikinyok aas tenebo peekijo kai kias peekishuku ena kulukuoni ang' nagirai iltung'anak lonkwapi pookin aing'orr toorkulie onyek eyieu neya.
Kake ekimbaa iltung'anak oya enkop ang' neoru yiok nikioki aaku nkabwobuo anaa kioki aaku ilaisinak alang ninye nikiata tanakata ake amu kejitoi kiata Tanzania osina nesipa keeta. Paasa neeta oolooruni enkop enye. Eng'oe olo aton tenkayiano ormotonyi.
Naa kanyoo duo nai orkilikwai lijo kaisho serkali tesiai ena kulukuoni amu kihangaika tenkata nalakwa kisujita ena kulukuoni neton ake kiata ilarrabal.
Ore orkilikuai layieu naisho serkali, nayieu naisho pooki tung'ani otii enkop. Ayieu najoki enyito eunga yiok enkaina, embung'aki yiok ena nirrumurrubu orais lang' tena rishata neton etii minyo aretoki yiok ashukoki yiok enkulukuoni ang' pee meya iloreren.
Ore yiok pee kibulu etii sinche ilapapa enkop, etii nooyieyio enkop naa kunen apake kimanya. Meeta sii yiok enkae toki nikiata mikiyiolo aateshetu nkajijik oosoitok, noonkikua apake nkang'itie nikitii, noorboro apake nkajijik nikishetita. Neeku ekiyieu yiok niyiolou aitambua ajo ninche oshi sinche nkang'itie ang' irmaasai. Nimintokiki ainyal iyiok tesiai oonkang'itie nikitii. Ore enakop pookin niyieu neya enaa kunen pookin mikimbung'ito nimikiputo, kuna ang'itie kishet kake entayiolo ajo ekira siiyiok iltasaniani enaa ntae, naa entayiolo siiyiok ajo ekira iltung'anak ootoiwuoki tenakop litu edoku.
Neeku naa kaliki ajoki ashe tina damunoto apa nitadamua yiok. Nabo, ore eniare, etii apa enkata natisira tiatua impala ashu tiatua mashinini ajo mikigira aorru irmaasai inkulukuoni. Najoki ashe. Kake mitosha apa yiok ina. Amu keyieu nai naa kepik entoki nadamunyeki. Meetai aikata oltung'ani leme teneim enkoitoi nepik osoit oshi oji osoit le msingi. Ore sininye osoit likiomon yiok metipikaki yiok irmaasai, nchoo epikaki yiok empalai naitodolu ajo enaang' ena kulukuoni nikitaramata kesipa, netii ng'uesi kesipa, paa ore ata etung'ayie ninye olorika neyamaki tenkang' enye alang' ening'ua kulie kijijini ishirita, amu meeta ake sinye dupoto nalo atum tenelo enkang' enye ishirita kulie kera. Naa ninche apa naategelutua, ketii apa irkimojik lang' lootegelutua ninye, neeku kajokito nanu toltau lai.
Ore sii entoki nayieu naomon dunia, naa kayieu paaliki dunia ajoki ore ake piiyai ena kulukuoni ang' nedung'o orkuak lang' pii mitokini aata. Naa ore ninche yiok enaa irmaasai mikitii yiok tayari pee king'ua orkuak lang'. Amu ore ninye orkuak lang' naa ninye oitodolu yiok ajo ekira enkabila ormaasai. Neeku kaomon serkali, naomon dunia piinyototo aarum serkali pee meorru yiok orkuak lang' nemeorru yiok esiai eramatare oonkishu amu ore peelo ena kulukuoni mikintoki aata nkishu nikiordoki nkishu, mee doi kiata ake nkishu enaa ekijo pee kintaa endaa.
Ore taata kindipita ena video ang', niteruaki aarr irmaasai, nepejori nkajijik onkang'itie, neeri olorere mpaka otanakata.
Mempiria largabong oisiasha, eketii irmasi lekimila, onetii emanyisho olosho lai, entushukokoki enkop ai melo, oyamaaku entaritiki, ekenashe etu enkaji tenchani neikinkiyioiti, olaleyo Marake peele nkulukuoni, onanyamalu lukuny ilewa, onanyamalu sii ilchekuti, kelepisiai etung'ayie ng'ateti nkileli osina, olaleyo amani ilarikok tenebo, entushukokoki enkop ai melo, mutenelo yiok enkulukuoni, onegilo olosho lang' tenkoriong' enyita entasaru, olaleyo
So this collection of films is quite sobering as to the power relations both on the ground in terms of within countries in Ethiopia and in Tanzania, but it also points to the power relations between different countries with the foreign investors that are coming in and the influence that they have, and how these lands, as Shoba Liban had said, they are not a wasteland, but others see them as something to be taken, something they do not see the pastoralist land use that is in progress, that is unfolding over time, over seasons, but they see it as something to be taken. And because pastoralists tend to be more marginalized in many of these countries in terms of the political processes, then a lot of this type of violence is enacted, and it just points to the importance of the type of advocacy work that is needing to be done to get these voices out there. So it's really quite an urgent issue. Although this last film was made in 2012, we know that a lot more has happened, and the Oakland Institute that put this film out has actually been designated as a terrorist organization by the Ethiopian government. So that really speaks volumes to why, for example, the filmmaker of this last film needed to stay anonymous. So yeah, we don't have the filmmaker from the last film present, but we did find a researcher, as I explained earlier, who has more than 20 years of experience working in Ethiopia, who can give some insights based on her own research in the area. So please, Eshi, if you could tell us a little bit more about the context from your research in Ethiopia.
Thank you for the invitation. And I think I don't want to talk about my research, but our research and collaboration. So I'm speaking also on behalf of the Lands of the Future initiative, which is an initiative not only of researchers and pastoralists, but also from people from all fields who are just trying to correct narratives that lead to the destruction, displacement, and the violent land grabs that we have observed that were depicted in these films. And our approach was, we started also around 2010 because all of the researchers that were concerned had been in areas all over Eastern Africa, actually, and were approached by their counterparts, pastoralist counterparts, to try to find out what was happening, because many of the investments were not announced. They just happened, and I got phone calls and people said, so now bulldozers are here, what is happening, can you explain? So we were not clear what's happening. So what we did is really grounded research, slow scholarship, to really distinguish rumor from fact. And because it's intransparent, many of the investments are not transparent, but we didn't want to hop on something too quickly. But we have done more than 10 years of research, and some of the facts we found were actually more devastating than the rumors we heard, some not. But I think I want to give some of the examples here in the discussion about what has happened, what we found out. We have published a book with detailed case studies, and we have several chapters on the on South Omo and on the sugarcane factory, which is connected to Gibe, the Gibe Dam. And to make it short, this whole enterprise was not only unofficially but officially declared an economic failure, but also cultural and environmental failure. The Malaysian investment that we saw in the Oakland film actually was stopped, like many other large-scale investments, because they were not successful or they had other problems. And I can give more details in a moment, but so this is to start where we are coming from, because that was your question. We wanted really to get the details doubly verified what is happening on the ground.
Yes, absolutely. So can you speak a bit more also in terms of what your perception is in terms of how to be both a scholar and an activist in terms of looking at the issues of I really like the term that you brought up in terms of slow scholarship and the importance of that fact checking. Perhaps you could speak a bit more to that.
Yes, because we were all researchers, all of the people that are connected to Lands of the Future, who did not research on land issues, but these topics came to us as they concerned the people we are closely connected with, and I think to find a position there was one of our first meetings. How do we position ourselves? But I think I would like to echo some of the voices from the film Olosho that maybe explains better than speaking for people. Why are you speaking for people? Maybe the question, what can one do, and what are the reasons for this? And I think what we very clearly heard is that it's so important to listen and connect to people with absolutely different ideas of what livelihoods would be. We heard that people are called primitive and backwards. These are the tropes under which development happened. And I don't want to excuse it, but often with real ignorance about the wealth of pastoralist lives that we have seen in the films and all what is CELEP about. So we don't need to here in this forum repeat that pastoralist livelihoods are rich and happening, but the investments were offered actually, you could see it on the internet. So the description of the land was empty and uninhabited. And so this is starting. So the voices at Olosho said, do not take our land. Do not use power to oppress us. We have many scenarios of extreme violence. And if you see that as a scholar, what do you do then? Open question first. Respect our ways of life. Pastoralist livelihoods was one message. There were very clear messages in this. Respect citizenship, so which is combined with constitutional land rights. And then you watch land being taken away, people being put in prison, intimidated, evicted from their land, and often very forcefully. And what we saw, you could say, okay, these were old films, but in Loliondo and in southern Ethiopia, this has continued, bouts of violence against people. And so what we say, the last attack on one of the communities that lives around the Omo River and has been displaced was a disarmament campaign, but it was extremely violent, with babies, women and elderly men killed and arrested and tortured, and nobody spoke about it. So do you call me an activist to say this happened? I mean, these are facts that we get phone calls or that we are talking about, and we just want to show the facts. And in our book, we have done this very detailed because it's so complex. We don't want to simplify anything. In Olosho also says rule and divide. There's not one pastoralist voice. So as researchers, we want to listen to many voices. And one of the things that I would like to put forward, if one would ask, what can one do? This was a sentence, return my land to me. This would be an extreme idea of maybe correcting injustices. And we have to see at a time and place in this world where injustices against indigenous peoples are surfacing and trying to be repaired. It's happening at the same time on pastoralist territories. And this needs to be heard and seen rather than being washed away saying these people are backward. And these tropes exist. And we are just trying to correct these ill-informed tropes.
Thank you so much. And I put the link for the book in the chat for this session. And I'd also like to invite Nick Lunch, who is the facilitator from Insight Share, who worked with the Maasai on the Olosho film. If you could also give us an update on that situation and also the process of working together with pastoralists so they can speak directly and powerfully like they did in this film. Thank you, Nick.
Hello, thank you very much, everybody. Yeah, it's good to be part of this session. Really found the last presentation about the Omo Valley very powerful and moving as well. So we're still working with the Maasai in Loliondo. That film was made some 6-7 years ago, and they've made several follow-up films since then on the issue, but also to direct their video cameras onto their culture and things that they're really proud of, things that they really cherish. So one of the ways that Indigenous people have renamed participatory video is searching for beauty, because wherever they decide to point the lens is something of very much a treasure, something to cherish, whether it's a language which is under threat, or interviewing an elder who to try and document and transmit the knowledge before that elder passes away. So often it's the young people involved in making the films, and that's been a really powerful hook. The young people are interested in the technology and being able to use smartphones and edit on the laptops and use social media. And of course, the elders are the ones who hold the knowledge. And so to create interesting films, the young people need to go and speak to the elders and get ideas and direction. So it's been a wonderful thing to watch participatory video being a way to strengthen that intergenerational transmission, which has been so under threat in recent decades because of the kind of modern Western ways of and education, which often are teaching young people that their Indigenous cultures are backwards, that they need to modernize or move to the cities, move away from their cultures. So participatory video has been a really strong antidote to that. I've actually got a message from Samuel Nangiria, who's one of the key leading activists in Loliondo, who was involved in making the film, which I'd like to read out if that's okay. It's just an update on the situation in Loliondo. He says that the Olosho video remains as one of the iconic videos that we've ever made. Its impact is clearly visible, showing the unity amongst the community, particularly across the three distinct clans of the Maasai that have constantly suffered the many evictions. And this is a very remarkable and powerful kind of joint statement coming from the different clans about what they understand as conservation, what conservation really is for the Maasai. They've had widespread screenings of the film. It's been screened in Parliament. It's been screened all over the world at the UN headquarters. It's been screened in many different Indigenous territories as well, because we work with many different Indigenous groups across all continents, training them in participatory video, and we support this kind of exchange of videos and knowledge between them and strategies, because so many communities are facing the same challenges. It's also made key stakeholders, including the government, to understand that the Maasai may not be conservationists, but conservation is a part of their way of life and always has been. The current situation is unfortunately still very serious. The government and the wildlife lobby groups are prepared to evict or relocate 73,000 Maasai from the Ngorongoro conservation area. And I have to say that sadly, UNESCO and IUCN seem to be supporting that position of the Tanzanian government. So that's something that urgently needs to happen. UNESCO and IUCN and be allies of the indigenous and pastoralist peoples, because as we all know, 80% of biodiversity is in indigenous territories currently and is being cared for and protected. And these communities are demonstrating a way of life that is, much more in harmony with nature. It's a way of life that all of us need to take on board as we address the climate crisis, ecological and social crisis facing the whole world. If this eviction happens, Samuel says, then it will cause irreparable socio-economic and environmental damages to the Maasai community, including losing their homeland. So just want to finish off by saying that we're running a program called the Living Cultures Fellowship. You can go onto our website to have a look at that, the Living Cultures Fellowship, insightshare.org. And we're working with young Indigenous people across Africa in 6 different communities in East Africa and Southern Africa, training them in digital activism skills, leadership skills, participatory video, and they're all making films currently on their culture, on the elements that they cherish about their culture, which are under threat. And this is very, very important because, as Echi mentioned just now, it's so important that we hear the voices of Indigenous peoples directly. They must speak for themselves on these issues. They are the true experts, and we need to amplify their voices into the global stage, as well as enabling them to exchange, like I said, with each other directly, exchange strategies, build solidarity, and build a movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both Nick and Eshi for joining us today. Unfortunately, we're at the end of time for this session. Personally, I would have loved to have talked about this for much longer because the issues are so powerful and clearly need urgent action and solidarity with pastoralists in order to address these very difficult and violent issues. So yeah, looking at different strategies from slow scholarship to participatory video about ways of getting the truth on the ground out there. So thank you so much for joining us in the third session out of 4 of the Perspectives on Pastoralism Film Festival. And just a brief shout out that there's information in the discussion board for the film festival about the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralism for 2026, and also about the second call for films for this film festival, which will be launched at the end of 2022. So thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.